On the outskirts of Millbrook County, where gravel roads disappear into forgotten farmland, neighbors had whispered about the Hartwell place for decades. Sarah Hartwell lived alone, they said, keeping to herself behind rusted gates and overgrown hedges. What they didn't know was that she wasn't alone at all. Hidden in the cellar of her crumbling farmhouse were 3 children, her own children, locked in makeshift cages, fed just enough to survive. For 12 years, she had been waiting, watching them grow, following a twisted plan she had written in careful detail. The children would be kept alive until they reached full size, when she would finally harvest what she had been nurturing all along. But what could drive a mother to such unthinkable depths of horror against her own flesh and blood? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke when Jenny Walsh pulled her county sedan down the rutted drive toward the Hartwell farmhouse. As a social worker with 15 years of experience, she had seen neglect in many forms, but something about this place made her skin crawl before she even stepped out of her car. The anonymous tip had been brief. Check on the woman at the old Hartwell place. Something isn't right. Deputy Morrison's cruiser was already parked near the sagging front porch, his presence a comfort in this isolated corner of the county. The farmhouse stood like a tired sentinel against the grey October sky, its paint peeling in long strips that reminded Jenny of dead skin. Weeds choked what had once been a garden, and the windows stared back at them like hollow eyes. "Been knocking for 10 minutes, Morrison said, touching the tarnished badge on his chest with nervous fingers. "No answer, but I can hear movement inside." "Something's not right here, Jenny." The deputy had worked these rural routes for 20 years, developing an instinct for trouble that had saved his life more than once. Today, that instinct was screaming warnings he couldn't ignore. The farm felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Too quiet, too still, like a held breath waiting to be released. Jenny approached the front door, noting the multiple locks and the way the curtains had been drawn so tightly that no light escaped from within. She knocked firmly, calling out in her professional voice, "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jenny Walsh from County Social Services. We'd like to speak with you." Silence answered them, broken only by what sounded like shuffling footsteps somewhere deep in the house. Morrison placed his hand on his service weapon, not drawing it but ready. Something was very wrong here, and years of experience had taught him to trust that feeling. "Mrs. Hartwell, we're coming in to check on your welfare," Jenny announced, following protocol even as her heart rate increased. Morrison nodded and tested the door. To their surprise, it swung open easily, as if someone had been expecting them. The smell hit them first, a mixture of decay, unwashed bodies, and something else that made Jenny's stomach turn. The interior of the house was a maze of newspapers stacked to the ceiling, creating narrow pathways between rooms. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through gaps in the curtains, and everywhere there were signs of someone living on the edge of sanity. "Hello?" Morrison called out, his voice echoing strangely in the cluttered space. Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. They moved deeper into the house, navigating between towers of hoarded items. In what had once been a living room, they found evidence of recent habitation, a plate with crumbs, a cup of tea still warm to the touch. But no sign of Sarah Hartwell. It was Jenny who noticed the door. Hidden behind a carefully arranged wall of old furniture, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a wooden door that didn't match the others in the house. It was newer, with heavy-duty locks that seemed out of place in the ramshackle farmhouse. "Morrison," she whispered, pointing toward the concealed entrance. "Look at this." The deputy examined the door, noting the industrial-strength hinges and the fact that all the locks were on the outside. His stomach dropped as the implications sank in. Whatever was behind this door was meant to be kept inside, not to keep intruders out. "Mrs. Hartwell," he called out one more time, louder now, his voice carrying both authority and growing concern. "We need to speak with you immediately." From somewhere beyond the hidden door came a sound that made both of them freeze, the unmistakable cry of a child. Not just one child, but multiple voices, weak and frightened, calling out in response to Morrison's shout. Jenny's hand flew to her mouth as the reality of what they were facing began to crystallize. Morrison was already working on the locks, his training kicking in as he prepared for whatever horror lay beyond that door. The anonymous tip hadn't been about neglect or welfare fraud. Someone had led them here to discover something far more sinister. As the last lock clicked open, they could hear movement below, the sound of bare feet on concrete, whispered voices trying to quiet each other, and something else that chilled them both to the bone. The metallic rattle of what sounded distinctly like cage doors. The wooden stairs creaked under their weight as Jenny and Morrison descended into what should have been a normal farmhouse cellar. Instead, they found themselves in a carefully constructed prison that defied every assumption about human decency. 3 metal cages dominated the underground space, each roughly 8 feet by 6 feet, welded together from salvaged farm equipment and reinforced with heavy wire mesh. The craftsmanship was crude but effective. These enclosures had been built to last, to contain, to hold growing bodies for years. Each cage contained a thin mattress, a plastic bucket, and a small shelf holding a few precious possessions. In the first cage, a girl who appeared to be around 12 years old pressed herself against the far corner, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 younger children who had somehow squeezed through the bars to reach her. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a face that was painfully thin but alert, with an intelligence that seemed far older than her years. "Please don't hurt us," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Mama said strangers would hurt us if they found us. We've been good. We've been so good." Jenny's professional composure cracked as she knelt before the cage, her hands trembling as she reached toward the children. The girl, Emma, she would later learn, pulled the younger ones closer, a gesture so fiercely protective that it broke something inside Jenny's chest. "Sweetheart, we're here to help you," Jenny managed, her voice barely steady. "What are your names?" The middle child, a boy with his sister's dark eyes, but a face that held traces of mischief despite their circumstances, spoke up with surprising boldness. "I'm Thomas. This is Emma, and that's Lucy." He pointed to the smallest child, a girl of perhaps 8, who hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived. Morrison was documenting everything with his phone, his jaw clenched so tightly that Jenny could hear his teeth grinding. On the walls around the cages, he found evidence of Sarah's systematic approach to their imprisonment. Charts tracked each child's height and weight with scientific precision, noting optimal feeding schedules and growth projections. Medical records showed Sarah had monitored their health with the dedication of a livestock farmer preparing for market. The cages themselves told a story of years spent in captivity. The metal bars were worn smooth in places where small hands had gripped them. Scratches in the concrete floor marked time in ways that calendars couldn't capture. But perhaps most heartbreaking were the signs of the children's resilience, drawings on the walls made with charcoal, small toys fashioned from scraps of fabric, and a collection of smooth stones that Thomas had apparently gathered from somewhere and arranged in careful patterns. "How long have you been down here?" Morrison asked gently, though he dreaded the answer. Emma looked confused by the question. "Always," she said simply. "This is where we live. This is where we've always lived." The realization hit Jenny like a physical blow. These children didn't know any other life. The basement prison wasn't a place they'd been taken to. It was the only home they'd ever known. The walls were covered with Emma's attempts to teach her siblings, using pieces of charcoal to write letters and numbers on any surface she could reach. Thomas had created an entire world of art using nothing but ash, from the heating system and water that dripped from a pipe in the corner. His drawings showed birds and trees and open spaces, things he had never seen but somehow dreamed into existence. Lucy clutched a doll made from rags and string, its face worn smooth by countless hours of desperate comfort. "Where is your mama now?" Jenny asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Upstairs, Emma replied. She brings us food and checks on us. She says we're special. She says we're being kept safe until we're ready. Morrison and Jenny exchanged a look that communicated volumes. Ready for what? The medical charts on the wall suggested Sarah had been monitoring more than just their health. She had been calculating something, planning for some specific moment when the children would reach a certain size or age. The sound of footsteps on the stairs above made all three children shrink back in terror. Sarah Hartwell was coming, and from the children's reaction, they knew that strangers in their sacred space would mean consequences they had learned to fear. "It's okay," Jenny whispered urgently. "We're going to get you out of here. All of you. I promise." But even as she made that promise, she wondered if these children could ever truly be free of this place, or if the cages had been built not just around their bodies, but around their souls as well. Detective Sarah Chen had seen her share of disturbing evidence in 20 years on the force, but nothing had prepared her for the leather-bound journal they discovered in Sarah Hartwell's bedroom, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bed, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. The journal represented 12 years of meticulous planning and gradual descent into madness. The first entries dated back to before the children were born, written in neat, careful handwriting that spoke of a mind still anchored to reality. Sarah had documented her pregnancy with Emma in clinical detail, noting her diet, her exercise routine, her preparation for what she called the most important project of my life. March 15th, Chen read aloud to the assembled team of investigators. "The baby moves more when I eat certain foods. I'm keeping track of everything. What makes her stronger? What makes her grow faster? This child will be perfect, untainted by the poisons of the modern world." As the entries progressed through the years, the handwriting became more erratic, the thoughts more disconnected from any recognizable maternal instinct. Sarah had documented every aspect of Emma's early development, but not with the joy of a new mother. Instead, she wrote with the detached observation of a scientist monitoring a valuable experiment. July 4th, Emma's second year, Chen continued, her voice growing quieter. "She's reaching optimal size for her age group. The isolation is working perfectly. No contamination from other children, no exposure to processed foods or chemicals. She trusts me completely. Soon, Thomas will join her, and together they'll represent the purest specimens I can create." The journal revealed that Sarah's twisted philosophy had been years in the making. She had convinced herself that she was protecting her children from a corrupt world, while simultaneously preparing them for their ultimate purpose. Her entries showed an obsession with pure nutrition, documenting feeding schedules with the precision of a livestock farmer. What chilled the investigators most was the gradual emergence of Sarah's true intentions. By the time Lucy was born 8 years ago, the journal entries had become explicit in their horror. "The older ones are nearly ready," read one entry from just 6 months earlier. "Emma shows excellent muscle development despite the limited space. Thomas has maintained ideal weight. Lucy still needs more time, but patience is a virtue." They understand their purpose now, even if they don't realize it. They know they are special, that they are loved, that everything I do is for them. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the forensic psychologist brought in to analyze the case, studied copies of the journal entries with growing horror and fascination. Sarah's writing revealed a mind that had twisted normal maternal instincts into something monstrous. She genuinely believed she was being a loving mother, protecting her children from a dangerous world while preparing them for what she saw as their noble destiny. She references her own childhood repeatedly, Dr. Reeves explained to the investigative team. Multiple entries describe near starvation during what she calls the hungry years, likely referring to the Great Depression era when her own mother struggled to feed the family. She seems to have developed a pathological relationship with food and survival. The journal also revealed the extent of Sarah's isolation from reality. For over a decade, she had lived in a world where her actions made perfect sense, where she was the protector and provider for children she loved deeply. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, genuine maternal affection. Twisted into preparation for the ultimate betrayal, Detective Chen found herself particularly disturbed by entries that showed Sarah's pride in her children's development. She had documented their first words, their artistic abilities, their emotional bonds with each other, all while planning their eventual fate. In her mind, she was raising the perfect specimens, and their perfection justified their purpose. December 1st last year, Chen read from one of the final entries. Emma asked me today why they can't go outside like the birds she draws. I told her that birds don't understand how dangerous the world is, that they often don't survive their first winter. She seemed to understand. My children are too precious to risk. They are my gift to myself, and soon they will give their gift to me. The journal's final entry was dated just 3 days before the discovery. Sarah had written about her preparations for what she called the celebration, describing her plans for a special meal that would mark the completion of her life's work. The clinical precision with which she described her intended actions made even seasoned investigators struggle to maintain their composure. As Dr. Reeves closed the journal, she reflected on the paradox of a woman who had devoted 12 years to caring for children she intended to destroy, who had shown them genuine affection while planning their ultimate betrayal. It was a level of psychological compartmentalization that challenged every assumption about the nature of love, protection, and the maternal bond. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens, foreign scents that made Emma clutch her siblings closer as they sat together on the wide bed. Dr. Patricia Reeves had spent 3 days gaining their trust before they would speak about their life in the cellar, and even now their voices came in whispers, as if Sarah might still be listening. Hidden beneath Emma's thin mattress back at the farm, investigators had discovered scraps of paper covered in her careful handwriting, a makeshift diary chronicling their underground existence, written with pieces of charcoal and pencil stubs Sarah had occasionally provided. These fragments revealed the inner world of children who had created meaning and love in the most impossible circumstances. I remember when Thomas was born, Emma told Dr. Reeves, her 12-year-old voice carrying the weight of someone much older. Mama brought him down to us when he was just a tiny baby. She said he was my responsibility, that I had to help him grow strong and healthy. I didn't understand what she meant then. Emma had indeed become a surrogate mother to her younger siblings, teaching them everything she could from her own limited knowledge. Her diary scraps showed evidence of lessons scratched into the cellar walls, simple arithmetic, basic reading skills, and moral lessons about kindness and sharing that she had somehow internalized despite their circumstances. Thomas, now 10, possessed an artistic gift that amazed everyone who saw his work. Using ash from the heating system, water from a leaking pipe, and any surface he could reach, he had created an entire gallery of images that showed remarkable talent and imagination. His drawings depicted things he had never seen: vast landscapes, soaring birds, children playing in sunlit meadows. I dreamed about outside, Thomas explained to Dr. Reeves, his fingers unconsciously sketching patterns on the hospital blanket. Emma would tell us stories about trees and grass and sky, and I would draw what I thought they might look like. Mama said the outside world was dangerous, but in my pictures it looked beautiful. Dr. Reeves marveled at Thomas's resilience and creativity. Despite never having access to proper art supplies, he had developed techniques for shading and perspective that suggested natural talent. His artwork had served as windows to a world they couldn't access, giving all 3 children something to hope for, even when they didn't understand what they were hoping for. Lucy, the youngest at 8, had been selectively mute since her rescue, speaking only to her siblings in whispers. She carried everywhere a doll made from scraps of fabric and string, its face worn smooth by years of desperate comfort. The investigators had found the doll in her cage, along with a collection of small stones that Thomas had somehow gathered and given to her as gifts. "Lucy talks to her dolly," Emma explained, stroking her sister's hair with the automatic tenderness of someone who had been a caregiver for years. "She tells her all the things she's too scared to say out loud. Sometimes I hear her practicing words with the dolly, like she's getting ready to talk to real people someday." The children's understanding of their situation was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of their testimony. They had accepted their life in the cellar as normal, believing Sarah's explanations that they were special, that they were being protected from a dangerous world that would hurt them if they ever left their underground home. "Mama said we were her precious ones," Emma continued, her voice growing smaller. "She said other children weren't as lucky as us, that they had to live in the scary world where bad things happened. She said we were safe with her, that she would always take care of us." Dr. Reeves noted the children's extraordinary bond with each other. Despite the cramped conditions and the stress of their situation, they showed none of the behavioral problems that typically emerged from extended isolation and abuse. Instead, they had developed an almost telepathic connection, communicating with glances and gestures that spoke of years spent reading each other's needs and moods. Thomas had taught Lucy to draw, sharing his limited supplies and encouraging her artistic attempts. Emma had created games and songs to pass the long hours, turning their imprisonment into something that resembled childhood play. Lucy had collected small treasures, smooth stones, interesting pieces of metal, scraps of colorful fabric, that she shared generously with her siblings. "We took care of each other," Emma said simply. "That's what families do. Mama taught us that, even if she taught us other things that were wrong. We knew we loved each other, and that love was real, even when everything else was confused." Their resilience astounded the medical team. Despite malnutrition, isolation, and psychological trauma, the children showed remarkable emotional intelligence and capacity for hope. They had somehow preserved their humanity in a situation designed to destroy it, creating love and meaning in a place where none should have existed. The faded wedding photograph sat on Detective Chen's desk like a window into a different world. Sarah Hartwell, 30 years younger, smiled radiantly beside a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands. The woman in the picture bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed figure they had arrested, and Robert Hartwell looked like the kind of man who would never have tolerated what his wife had become. "They were the nicest couple," said Martha Brennan, their closest neighbor, settling her arthritic hands around a cup of coffee in the police station's interview room. "Robert was always willing to help with harvest time, and Sarah used to bring me vegetables from their garden. You'd never have imagined." Her voice trailed off as she struggled to reconcile her memories with the horror that had been discovered. The investigation into Sarah's background had revealed a gradual transformation that began with tragedy. Robert Hartwell had died in a farming accident 8 years earlier, crushed when his tractor overturned in a muddy field during spring planting. Neighbors recalled that Sarah had never been quite the same after that day. Withdrawing from the community that had once embraced her, she stopped coming to church first, remembered Pastor Williams, a weathered man who had officiated their wedding 25 years ago. Then she stopped answering her door when we came to check on her. We all thought she was just grieving in her own way. If we had known... He shook his head, guilt heavy in his voice. The county records told a more disturbing story than anyone had suspected. Detective Chen discovered that Sarah and Robert had indeed had other children, 2 older boys who had supposedly died in infancy, according to death certificates filed by Sarah herself. But the dates were suspicious, and further investigation revealed inconsistencies that suggested something far more sinister. "Look at this," Chen said to her partner. Detective Rodriguez spreading the documents across their desk. The first child allegedly died of sudden infant death syndrome when he was 2 years old. The second supposedly succumbed to pneumonia at 18 months. But there are no hospital records, no physician signatures except for Dr. Morrison, who died 5 years ago and can't verify anything. The pattern became clearer as they dug deeper. Sarah had been giving birth to children for over 15 years, always at home, always without official medical supervision. The few neighbors who remembered the early years spoke of seeing pregnant Sarah, but never seeing the babies after. They were supposedly born. She always said the babies were too delicate for visitors, recalled Mrs. Henderson, who had lived down the road until moving to town after her husband's death. She was very protective, said the outside world was too dangerous for them. We respected that. Maybe we shouldn't have. Town records showed that none of the children, not Emma, Thomas, Lucy, or the two who had allegedly died, had ever been issued birth certificates through normal channels. Sarah had filed the paperwork herself, claiming home births attended only by a midwife whose identity was never verified. The children existed in official records, but had never truly existed in the community. The photograph on Chen's desk became a focal point for understanding Sarah's transformation. In those early days, she had been an active member of the community, volunteering at church functions and participating in local events. Robert's death hadn't just taken her husband, it had severed her connection to everything that had kept her anchored to reality. After Robert died, she became obsessed with protection, Pastor Williams explained. She would talk about how dangerous the world was becoming, how children weren't safe anymore. We thought it was just grief talking, the fear that comes after losing someone you love. We never imagined she might. He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Reeves, analyzing the timeline, began to see a pattern of escalating isolation and paranoia. Sarah's transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process that accelerated after Robert's death. Without his stabilizing presence, her protective instincts had slowly warped into something unrecognizable. The wedding photo shows us who she used to be, Dr. Reeves explained to the investigative team. A woman capable of love, of normal relationships, of participating in society. But trauma can fundamentally alter brain chemistry, especially when combined with isolation and unprocessed grief. The community's guilt was palpable as more details emerged. Neighbors spoke of seeing less and less of Sarah over the years, of mail piling up at her box, of the farm falling into disrepair. But rural communities respected privacy, and no one wanted to intrude on a widow's grief. Their respect for her space had inadvertently enabled her descent into madness. As Chen studied the wedding photograph, she wondered if Robert Hartwell could have prevented what came after. Had his presence been the only thing standing between Sarah and the abyss? The image of their happiness seemed to mock the horror his wife had created in his absence. A reminder that sometimes the line between love and destruction was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. Agent Catherine Mills, from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, spread the collection of faded milk cartons across the conference table, their missing children photos staring up at the assembled investigators like ghosts demanding justice. The local case had expanded far beyond Millbrook County's jurisdiction when the ground-penetrating radar revealed what lay beneath the old root cellar behind Sarah's farmhouse. We've identified 2 sets of remains. Agent Mills announced to the task force that now included federal investigators, state police, and local authorities. Male children, approximately 4 and 6 years old at time of death. Dental records confirm these are the children Sarah reported as dying from natural causes 15 years ago. The excavation had been methodical and heartbreaking. The small skeletons were found carefully buried in wooden boxes, wrapped in quilts that Sarah had apparently sewn herself. But the forensic evidence told a story that contradicted every maternal instinct. Cut marks on the bones suggested systematic dismemberment, and the condition of the remains indicated they had been stored for some time before burial. Dr. Amanda Foster, the forensic anthropologist leading the examination, had seen her share of disturbing cases, but this one challenged her professional objectivity. The preservation techniques suggest she kept them for an extended period, she explained, her voice carefully controlled. The bones show evidence of careful preparation. Almost ritualistic in nature, Detective Chen found herself studying the milk carton photos, wondering if other missing children might be connected to Sarah's farm. The timeline suggested a pattern that stretched back decades. Children who might have been taken or acquired through means they were still trying to understand. Look at these dates, Rodriguez pointed out, organizing the cartons chronologically. 3 children went missing from surrounding counties during the period when Sarah's first 2 boys would have been the right age. All from isolated rural families, all reported as runaways, or assumed to have wandered off. The investigation had revealed a network of contacts that Sarah had maintained despite her isolation. Old phone records showed calls to adoption agencies, private services, and individuals who facilitated unofficial child placements. She had been careful, patient, building a system that could provide her with what she needed while avoiding official scrutiny. Agent Mills interviewed caseworkers from various agencies, discovering a pattern of inquiries from someone matching Sarah's description. She presented herself as a loving woman who wanted to help children in need, explained Rebecca Torres, a social worker from the neighboring county. She asked about children who might benefit from rural life, away from the corruptions of urban environments. We thought she was just another well-meaning farm wife. The scope of Sarah's planning became clear as investigators traced her activities over the years. She had cultivated relationships with people who dealt with vulnerable children, runaways, kids aging out of foster care, children from families struggling with poverty or addiction. She positioned herself as a resource, a safe haven for children who might not be missed immediately. She was incredibly manipulative, Dr. Reeves observed, studying transcripts of Sarah's interviews with social workers. She presented exactly the image they wanted to see, a grieving mother who had lost her own children and wanted to help others. She knew which buttons to push, which stories would generate sympathy. The evidence suggested that Emma, Thomas, and Lucy might not have been Sarah's biological children at all, but rather carefully selected acquisitions that fit her specific needs. DNA testing was underway, but Sarah's meticulous records indicated she had been collecting children for years, keeping only those who met her exacting standards. The children she didn't keep simply disappeared, Agent Mills explained grimly. We're looking at potentially dozens of missing persons cases that might be connected to this farm. She had 15 years to perfect her system. The milk cartons became symbols of a much larger tragedy than anyone had initially realized. Each photo represented not just a missing child, but a family destroyed by uncertainty, parents who had spent years wondering what happened to their babies. Now some of those families might finally get answers, though the truth would be more horrible than anything they had imagined. Local law enforcement was overwhelmed by the scope of the investigation. What had begun as a welfare check on an isolated farm had become one of the most extensive serial killing investigations in the state's history. The quiet rural community found itself at the center of a media storm as reporters descended to cover the case. She turned child-rearing into livestock management, Agent Mills told the press conference. Her words carefully chosen to convey the horror without revealing details that might compromise the investigation. This represents a level of systematic planning and execution that challenges our understanding of criminal behavior. As the investigation continued, one question haunted everyone involved: how many more children were out there? How many families were still waiting for answers that might never come? The milk cartons on the table seemed to multiply in their minds, each one representing a life cut short by a woman who had twisted love into something monstrous. Dr. Patricia Reeves sat across from Sarah Hartwell in the sterile interview room at the county jail, studying the clinical notes that would help her understand one of the most disturbing cases of her 30-year career. Sarah appeared calm, almost serene, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she discussed her children with the same maternal pride any mother might display when talking about her family's accomplishments. "Emma was always the brightest," Sarah said with genuine warmth in her voice. "She learned to read so quickly, and she was such a good big sister to Thomas and Lucy. I'm very proud of how well she took care of them." "That's what families do. They take care of each other." Dr. Reeves made careful notes, documenting the complete disconnect between Sarah's perception of herself as a loving mother and the reality of what she had done to her children. The psychological assessment would be crucial for understanding not only Sarah's mental state but also for helping the surviving children process their own complex feelings about the woman who had been both their captor and their caretaker. "Tell me about your daily routine with the children," Dr. Reeves prompted, maintaining her professional composure despite the horror of what she was documenting. "Oh, we had wonderful routines," Sarah replied, her eyes lighting up with remembered joy. "I would bring them their meals at exactly the right times. Proper nutrition is so important for growing children. I monitored their health carefully, made sure they got exercise, provided them with educational materials. We were a real family, just a protected family." The clinical notes revealed a complex psychological profile that defied simple categorization. Sarah showed no signs of traditional psychosis. She was fully aware of reality and capable of logical thought. Instead, she demonstrated what Dr. Reeves recognized as a rare form of compartmentalized thinking that allowed her to hold two completely contradictory beliefs simultaneously. "When you say protected, what were you protecting them from?" Dr. Reeves asked, carefully probing the boundaries of Sarah's rationalized worldview. "The corruption," Sarah answered without hesitation. "The chemicals, the processed foods, the violence, the moral decay. Children today are exposed to so many toxins, so many harmful influences. My children were pure, clean, safe from all of that contamination." Dr. Reeves noted the religious undertones in Sarah's language, mixed with environmental concerns and nutritional obsessions that seemed to stem from her own childhood experiences of poverty and hunger. Sarah's psychiatric evaluation revealed a woman who had constructed an elaborate belief system that justified her actions not as abuse, but as the ultimate expression of maternal love. "What was your plan for when they grew older?" Dr. Reeves asked, approaching the core question that everyone needed answered. "They were going to fulfill their purpose," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "They were raised with such care, such attention to their purity and health. They were going to give back to the person who had sacrificed everything for them. It was going to be beautiful, the completion of the circle of life and love." The chilling calm with which Sarah discussed her intentions revealed a mind that had completely reframed cannibalism as an act of love and spiritual completion. Her childhood memories of near starvation during the Great Depression had warped into a philosophy that viewed her children not as individuals with their own rights and futures, but as carefully cultivated resources meant to sustain her. Dr. Reeves spent hours exploring Sarah's psychological development, tracing the path from normal maternal instincts to monstrous perversion. The death of her husband, Robert, appeared to be the triggering event that removed her last connection to consensual reality. Without his stabilizing influence, her protective instincts had gradually transformed into something predatory. "I loved them more than any mother has ever loved her children," Sarah insisted, tears streaming down her face for the first time during their sessions. "Every decision I made was for their benefit, to keep them safe and pure. How can people not understand that? How can they call what I did wrong when it came from such deep love?" The psychological assessment revealed Sarah's complete inability to comprehend the harm she had caused. In her mind, she had been the perfect mother, sacrificing her own comfort and social connections to provide her children with the ultimate protection. The fact that this protection was actually imprisonment, and that her love was actually preparation for murder, simply didn't register in her consciousness. Dr. Reeves found herself struggling with the ethical implications of trying to understand such profound evil. Sarah's case challenged every assumption about maternal bonding and protective instincts. She had demonstrated genuine care for her children's daily needs while simultaneously planning their destruction, a level of psychological compartmentalization that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. As the sessions continued, Dr. Reeves realized that Sarah might never be capable of understanding the true nature of her crimes. Her delusions were too deeply embedded, her rationalization too complete. She would go to her grave believing she had been a loving mother, who had been persecuted for protecting her children from a dangerous world. The Millbrook County Herald's front-page headline screamed in bold letters, "Farm of Horrors. Local woman accused of caging children for cannibalism." Within hours, news vans lined the quiet streets of their rural community, transforming the sleepy farming town into the epicenter of a media circus that would forever change how residents saw their neighbors and themselves. Martha Brennan sat in her kitchen, staring at the newspaper clippings she had cut out and saved, though she couldn't explain why. The photograph showed Sarah's farmhouse, surrounded by police tape, looking more ominous in black and white than it ever had when she drove past it on her way to town. How had she lived so close to such evil without sensing it? "We should have known," she told her daughter during one of their daily phone calls that had become increasingly frequent since the discovery. There were signs, the way she stopped coming to church, how she never had visitors, how quiet that place was. We all thought we were being respectful of her privacy, but maybe we were just being cowards. The guilt spread through the community like a contagion. Pastor Williams had organized a special prayer service the Sunday after the arrests, but the church was only half full. People were afraid to look at each other, afraid of what they might see in their neighbors' eyes. The same questions, the same self-recrimination that kept them awake at night. The anonymous tip that had led to the discovery had come from Eddie Morrison, the postal worker who had noticed that Sarah's mailbox hadn't been emptied in months. For years, he had simply returned undelivered mail to the post office, following protocol without questioning why someone might not want to receive their bills and advertisements. Now he was hailed as a hero, but the recognition felt hollow when he thought about how long he had waited to act. "I knew something was off," Eddie told the newspaper reporter who tracked him down at his modest trailer outside town. "But knowing and doing something about it are two different things. I keep thinking about those kids down in that cellar while I was just driving past their house every day, doing my job, minding my own business." The media attention brought unwanted visitors to Millbrook County. True crime enthusiasts arrived with cameras, hoping to get photographs of the farmhouse before it was demolished. Some came claiming to be documentarians or journalists, but most were simply curiosity seekers, drawn to the scene of unimaginable horror like moths to a flame. Local businesses found themselves in the uncomfortable position of profiting from tragedy. The diner where reporters gathered for coffee and interviews saw its busiest weeks in decades. The motel on Highway 9 was booked solid for the first time since the interstate bypass had been completed 20 years earlier. Some residents felt sick taking money from people who were there to exploit their community's pain. The town council called an emergency meeting to discuss how to handle the situation. Mayor Patricia Wells, a woman who had run unopposed for the past 12 years because no one else wanted the job, found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. The community needed leadership, but she felt as lost and horrified as everyone else. "We need to think about those children," she told the packed town hall, her voice carrying over the murmur of concerned residents. "They're going to need support, and they're going to need to know that this community cares about their healing. Not just their story." A collection was organized for the children's medical and psychological care. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from neighbors who had never spoken to each other, from farmers who could barely afford to give anything, from retirees living on fixed incomes who felt compelled to contribute something to help heal the damage that had been done in their midst. But the media attention also brought out the worst in some people. Conspiracy theorists arrived, claiming the whole thing was a hoax designed to discredit rural communities. Others suggested that the neighbors must have known and were covering up their own involvement. The toxic speculation poisoned conversations and created suspicion where none had existed before. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a crisis counselor brought in by the county, held support groups for residents struggling with trauma and guilt. Many people attended, needing to process their feelings about living so close to such evil without recognizing it. The sessions became a place where the community could begin to heal, but also where they confronted uncomfortable truths about isolation and willful blindness. "We can't change what happened," Dr. Martinez told one particularly emotional group session, "but we can change how we look out for each other going forward. This tragedy doesn't have to define your community unless you let it." The newspaper clippings would be preserved in the County Historical Society, a permanent record of the day their quiet farming community learned that evil could hide behind the most ordinary facades, and that sometimes the price of minding your own business was measured in innocent lives. District Attorney Rebecca Stone spread the case files across her office conference table, creating a mountain of evidence that represented the most disturbing prosecution of her 20-year career. The legal briefs, forensic reports, psychological evaluations, and witness statements formed a comprehensive portrait of systematic evil that would challenge every assumption the jury held about maternal love and human nature. "This isn't just about proving guilt," Stone explained to her prosecution team during their morning briefing. "Sarah Hartwell's actions are so far outside normal human behavior that we need to help the jury understand how such evil is even possible. We're not just seeking justice, we're trying to restore faith in the fundamental concepts of protection and care." The challenge of prosecuting Sarah went beyond the usual legal considerations. Her defense attorney, Michael Chen, had been appointed by the court after 3 private attorneys declined to take the case. Chen was a competent public defender, but he faced the impossible task of defending someone whose crimes defied any conventional legal strategy. "She refuses to plead insanity," Chen told Stone during one of their pre-trial conferences. "She genuinely believes she was a loving mother who was protecting her children. In her mind, we're persecuting her for being too good a parent. How do you defend someone who can't acknowledge that what they did was wrong?" The evidence was overwhelming, but emotionally devastating to present. Crime scene photographs showed the makeshift cages where 3 children had spent their entire lives. Medical records documented years of careful monitoring that resembled livestock management more than childcare. Sarah's journal entries revealed a twisted philosophy that had guided 12 years of systematic preparation for murder. Dr. Patricia Reeves would be a key witness for the prosecution, but her testimony would need to walk a careful line. The jury needed to understand Sarah's psychological state without allowing sympathy for her mental illness to overshadow the horror of her crimes. The challenge is helping people understand that mental illness doesn't excuse evil. Dr. Reeves explained to the prosecution team, "Sarah's condition may explain how she rationalized her actions, but it doesn't diminish her culpability. She knew right from wrong. She simply redefined wrong to suit her purposes." The children's testimony would be the most crucial and most difficult aspect of the trial. Emma, Thomas, and Lucy had made remarkable progress in their recovery, but asking them to relive their experiences in a courtroom filled with strangers would require extraordinary care, and protection child advocacy specialists worked with the court to establish special accommodations. The children would testify via closed-circuit television from a separate room, with only essential personnel present. Their identities would be protected, and their testimony would be limited to essential facts that established the nature of their imprisonment. "We have to balance their need for protection with the jury's need to understand what these children endured, explained victim advocate Maria Santos. Their testimony will be the most powerful evidence we have, but we can't re-traumatize them in pursuit of justice. The forensic evidence told its own story of systematic planning and preparation. The cages had been constructed over time, with modifications that showed Sarah had been learning and adapting her methods. The children's medical records revealed careful monitoring of their growth and development, as if they were livestock being prepared for market. Look at these feeding schedules, forensic analyst Dr. James Wright pointed out to the legal team. She wasn't just keeping them alive, she was optimizing their nutritional intake for specific outcomes. This wasn't impulse or mental breakdown. This was methodical preparation over years. The defense team faced an almost impossible task. Sarah's crimes were so well documented and so heinous that traditional defense strategies seemed inadequate. They couldn't claim innocence, couldn't effectively argue insanity, and couldn't generate sympathy for their client without appearing to minimize her victim's suffering. Media coverage of the trial preparation brought national attention to rural child welfare issues. Legal experts debated whether existing laws adequately addressed cases of such systematic and prolonged abuse. Child protection advocates used the case to highlight gaps in monitoring systems that allowed vulnerable children to disappear without anyone noticing. This case exposes fundamental flaws in how we track and protect children in rural communities, explained Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Center for Missing Children. Sarah was able to acquire and abuse children for over a decade because our systems aren't designed to catch this kind of systematic predation. As the trial date approached, everyone involved felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about convicting one woman for her crimes. It was about sending a message that society would not tolerate the systematic abuse of children, regardless of how it was rationalized or justified. The legal briefs on Stone's desk represented more than evidence. They were a roadmap through one of the darkest cases in the state's history, a path toward justice for 3 children who had survived the unthinkable and deserved to see their abuser held accountable for every day of suffering she had caused. Judge Harold Morrison raised his gavel above the polished wood of the bench, the morning light streaming through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across a courtroom packed beyond capacity. The weight of the moment settled over everyone present as they prepared to witness justice attempt to make sense of incomprehensible evil. Jury selection had taken 3 weeks, as potential jurors were dismissed one after another for having already formed opinions about the case. The media coverage had been so extensive that finding 12 people who could approach the evidence with open minds had proved nearly impossible. Finally, a jury of 8 women and 4 men had been seated: farmers, teachers, retirees and small business owners who would be asked to judge crimes that challenged their understanding of human nature. This case will test your faith in humanity, Judge Morrison warned the assembled jury during his opening instructions. You will hear testimony and see evidence that may disturb you deeply. But your job is not to be shocked or horrified. It is to determine guilt or innocence based on the facts presented. Justice requires clear thinking, even in the face of evil. District Attorney Rebecca Stone rose to deliver her opening statement, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to describe. She had practiced these words for weeks, knowing that the jury's first impression would shape everything that followed. Members of the jury, this case is about the ultimate betrayal of the most sacred trust in human society: the bond between a mother and her children. For 12 years, Sarah Hartwell systematically imprisoned, monitored and prepared 3 innocent children for a fate so horrible that it challenges our understanding of maternal love. Stone walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each member as she continued. The evidence will show that the defendant didn't simply abuse these children, she cultivated them. She raised them like livestock, monitoring their growth, controlling their nutrition, and planning their eventual slaughter with the methodical precision of a farmer preparing for harvest. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the quiet sobbing of someone in the gallery. Sarah sat at the defense table, her face serene and almost peaceful, as if she were listening to a weather report rather than a description of her own monstrous crimes. Defense attorney Michael Chen faced an impossible task as he rose for his opening statement. His client had refused to allow him to present an insanity defense, maintaining that she had been a loving mother who was being persecuted for protecting her children. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen began, his voice heavy with the burden of his impossible position, "you will indeed hear disturbing testimony in this case. But I ask you to remember that mental illness can twist even the most basic human emotions into something unrecognizable. Sarah Hartwell is not evil. She is profoundly sick." Chen struggled to find words that could humanize his client without appearing to excuse her crimes. The evidence will show that Mrs. Hartwell suffered severe childhood trauma that shaped her understanding of love and protection. In her deeply disturbed mind, she believed she was saving her children from a dangerous world. This doesn't excuse her actions, but it may help you understand how such terrible decisions were made. The first witnesses were the responding officers who had discovered the children. Deputy Morrison took the stand, his hands shaking slightly as he described descending into the cellar and finding 3 children living in cages. His testimony was matter-of-fact, but emotionally devastating, describing the scene with the professional detachment of someone who had trained himself not to feel. "The smell hit us first," Morrison testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then we heard the children crying. When we opened that cellar door and saw what was down there, I'll admit it, I had to step outside for a moment. In 30 years of law enforcement, I had never seen anything like it." Social worker Jenny Walsh followed Morrison to the stand, describing her first interaction with the children and their confusion about the outside world. Her testimony painted a picture of 3 young lives that had been completely controlled and isolated from normal human experience. "Emma kept apologizing," Walsh testified, tears visible in her eyes despite her professional composure. "She was afraid they had done something wrong by talking to us. She kept asking if her mama would be angry that strangers had found them." The jury listened in stunned silence as witness after witness described the systematic nature of Sarah's crimes. Crime scene investigators detailed the construction of the cages, the feeding schedules posted on the walls, the medical charts tracking each child's growth and development. Throughout the testimony, Sarah remained calm, occasionally taking notes but showing no visible emotion. Her demeanor was perhaps more disturbing than tears or outbursts would have been. The complete disconnect between her peaceful presence and the horror being described suggested a mind so far removed from reality that rehabilitation seemed impossible. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Emma's voice crackled through the speakers of the closed-circuit television system. In a separate room designed specifically for child witnesses, 13-year-old Emma sat beside victim advocate Maria Santos, her testimony being recorded for posterity while protecting her from the overwhelming presence of the packed courtroom. The court reporter's fingers moved steadily across her stenotype machine, capturing every word of Emma's testimony in the official transcript that would become part of the permanent record. Her words, spoken in the clear, measured voice of someone much older than her years, painted a picture of childhood that defied every assumption about family and protection. "We lived downstairs," Emma said simply, her hands folded in her lap in a gesture that reminded everyone of her mother's courtroom demeanor. "That was our home. Mama said it was safer for us there, that the outside world had bad things that could hurt us. District Attorney Stone, speaking gently through the video link, asked Emma to describe their daily routine. The girl's answer revealed the systematic nature of their imprisonment with heartbreaking matter-of-factness. "Mama would bring us food 3 times a day," Emma explained. She had charts on the wall that told her what we needed to eat to stay healthy. She checked on us every few hours, made sure we were growing properly. She said we were special, that we were her precious ones. The jury listened in stunned silence as Emma described years of living in metal cages as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her testimony revealed the psychological manipulation that had convinced 3 children that their imprisonment was actually protection, that their suffering was actually love. "Did you ever ask to go outside?" Stone asked carefully. "Sometimes," Emma replied. "But Mama explained that outside was dangerous. She said there were people who would hurt us, poison us, take us away from our family. She showed us pictures sometimes of children who looked sick and sad. She said that's what happened to children who lived in the outside world." Thomas took the stand next, his testimony accompanied by drawings he had created during his recovery. His artwork showed remarkable talent, but also revealed the limited scope of his imagination. Images of the cellar, his siblings, and fantastical creatures that lived in the darkness beyond their cages. "I drew pictures of what I thought outside looked like," Thomas explained, his 10-year-old voice steady but quiet. "Emma would tell us stories about trees and birds and sunshine. I tried to draw those things, but I didn't really know what they looked like." The prosecution introduced Thomas's drawings as evidence, and several jury members visibly struggled to maintain their composure as they examined artwork that showed extraordinary talent, constrained by unimaginable circumstances. His pictures revealed a child's desperate attempt to imagine a world beyond his prison. "Did your mama ever talk about the future?" Stone asked Thomas. "She said when we got big enough we would have a special celebration," Thomas replied. "She said we would finally be able to give back to her for all the love she had given us. She seemed really happy when she talked about it." Lucy, now 9 years old, was deemed too fragile to testify in person. Instead, Dr. Patricia Reeves read excerpts from her therapy sessions, with the court's permission and careful attention to protecting the child's privacy. Lucy has described her mother as someone who took care of us but made us scared, Dr. Reeves testified. She has recurring nightmares about being hungry and about disappointing her mother. But she also expresses love for Sarah, which is common in cases of long-term abuse, where the abuser is also the primary caregiver. The children's medical records, introduced as evidence, showed the systematic monitoring that Sarah had conducted over the years. Growth charts, nutrition logs, and health assessments revealed that she had treated her children like a scientific experiment, tracking their development with the precision of a researcher studying lab animals. Defense attorney Jen struggled during cross-examination to challenge the children's testimony without appearing to attack them. His questions focused on their recovery and their current understanding of their situation, trying to establish that their perception of events might have been influenced by their therapy and by well-meaning adults who had helped them understand that their situation had been abnormal. "Emma, you've learned a lot about the outside world since you were rescued," Chen said gently. "Is it possible that some of your feelings about your mother have changed as you've learned more about how other families live?" "I understand now that what Mama did was wrong," Emma replied with stunning maturity. "But I also understand that she thought she was loving us. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make the love completely fake either. People can love you and hurt you at the same time." Her answer silenced the courtroom and brought tears to the eyes of several jury members. The transcript would record her words exactly, preserving forever the wisdom of a child who had survived the unthinkable and somehow emerged with her capacity for understanding intact. The jury had been deliberating for exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes when the bailiff announced they had reached a verdict. The speed of their decision surprised no one who had witnessed the overwhelming evidence presented over 2 weeks of testimony. But it still sent a ripple of nervous energy through the packed courtroom. Judge Morrison called the court to order as the 12 jurors filed back into the jury box, their faces grave and emotionally drained. Jury foreman Robert Hayes, a retired teacher who had spent 40 years working with children, stood slowly and cleared his throat before speaking the words that would seal Sarah Hartwell's fate. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Michael Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of David Hartwell, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of kidnapping, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder regarding Emma, Thomas, and Lucy, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. Sarah showed no visible reaction to the verdict, sitting calmly at the defense table as if she were listening to someone read a grocery list. Her composure in the face of a conviction that would likely result in a death sentence was perhaps more chilling than an emotional outburst would have been. The sentencing phase began immediately, with victim impact statements that brought the courtroom to tears. Foster mother Helen Rodriguez spoke on behalf of the children, describing their ongoing struggles and remarkable resilience in the face of unimaginable trauma. "These children have shown me what the human spirit is capable of surviving," Rodriguez testified, her voice breaking with emotion. "But they will carry the scars of what Sarah Hartwell did to them for the rest of their lives." Emma still has nightmares about disappointing her mama. Thomas draws pictures of cages, even though he's been free for over a year. Lucy jumps at loud noises and hoards food under her bed because she's afraid someone will take it away. Dr. Patricia Reeves provided professional testimony about the long-term psychological impact of the children's ordeal. Her assessment painted a picture of 3 young people who would need years of continued therapy and support to fully heal from their experiences. "The miracle is not just that they survived," Dr. Reeves explained to the court, "but that they survived with their capacity for love and trust intact." Sarah Hartwell may have stolen their childhood, but she did not destroy their humanity. Defense attorney Chen made a final plea for mercy, arguing that Sarah's severe mental illness should preclude the death penalty. His words felt hollow in the face of the systematic nature of her crimes, but he fulfilled his obligation to advocate for his client's life. "Mental illness does not excuse Sarah Hartwell's actions," Chen acknowledged, "but it should inform our response to them. Executing a profoundly sick woman will not bring back the children who died, and it will not heal the children who survived." Judge Morrison took nearly an hour to deliver his sentencing decision, speaking with the weight of someone who understood the historic nature of the moment. His words would be quoted in legal journals and remembered long after the immediate emotions of the trial had faded. In 40 years on the bench, I have never encountered crimes that so fundamentally challenge our understanding of human nature, Judge Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent weighing justice against mercy. Sarah Hartwell committed acts that are not merely criminal, they represent a complete perversion of the most sacred bonds of human society. He paused, looking directly at Sarah, who met his gaze with the same serene expression she had maintained throughout the trial. The systematic nature of these crimes, the careful planning over many years, and the complete absence of remorse convince me that the death penalty is not only appropriate but necessary. Sarah Hartwell, I sentence you to death by lethal injection, to be carried out at a time and place determined by the State Corrections Department. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and sobbing as the sentence was announced. Sarah's only reaction was to turn slightly toward her attorney and ask quietly, "Who will take care of my children now?" The question hung in the air like a final act of delusion, reminding everyone present that even in the face of justice, Sarah remained convinced that she had been a loving mother wrongly persecuted for protecting her family. As the bailiff led Sarah away in shackles, the official death sentence document was prepared and filed with the court clerk. The piece of paper represented the end of a legal process, but everyone knew that true justice for the children would require years of healing that no court verdict could provide. The media coverage of the sentencing spread internationally within hours, with legal experts debating the case's implications for future child abuse prosecutions. But in the quiet moments after the courtroom emptied, only one thing truly mattered. 3 children would never again have to fear the woman who had stolen their childhood and planned their deaths. The foster family photos sat in frames throughout the Rodriguez household, capturing moments that would have been impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier. Emma laughing as she helped prepare dinner in a real kitchen. Thomas proudly displaying a painting he had created with proper brushes and canvas. Lucy playing with neighborhood children in a backyard filled with sunshine and the sounds of normal childhood. Helen Rodriguez had been fostering children for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the unique challenges of caring for Emma. Thomas and Lucy, the 3 siblings, had been placed in separate but nearby homes to give them space to develop their individual identities while maintaining the close bond that had sustained them through their ordeal. The first few months were the hardest. Helen explained to Dr. Patricia Reeves during one of their regular check-ins. Emma couldn't sleep in a bed. She was only comfortable on the floor in the corner of the room. Thomas would panic if there were too many colors around him. Lucy wouldn't eat unless she could see exactly where the food came from. The children's adjustment to normal life had been a process measured in tiny victories and occasional setbacks. Emma, now 14, struggled with survivor's guilt and an overwhelming need to protect everyone around her. She had appointed herself the unofficial guardian of her foster siblings, checking on them obsessively and intervening whenever she perceived any threat to their safety. She's trying to be the mother she never had, Helen observed, watching Emma carefully cut Lucy's sandwich into perfect squares during a supervised visit. But she's also trying to be the mother she lost. It's a complicated grief that most therapists have never seen before. Thomas had flourished in ways that amazed everyone involved in his care. With access to proper art supplies for the first time in his life, his natural talent had exploded into works that captured the attention of local galleries and art therapy programs. His paintings had evolved from the dark, constrained images of his captivity to brilliant landscapes filled with light and possibility. He's painting the world he always dreamed about, explained his foster father, retired art teacher Michael Chen. But he's also painting his way through the trauma. Some of his pieces still show cages and darkness, but now they also show doors opening and children running free. Lucy had perhaps made the most dramatic progress of all 3 children. Her selective mutism had gradually given way to a chattiness that delighted everyone around her. She had an exceptional memory and a gift for languages that suggested intellectual abilities that had been hidden during her years of captivity. She remembers everything. Her foster mother, Maria Santos, marveled during a therapy session. She can tell you exactly what she had for lunch 3 weeks ago, but she can also recite entire conversations word for word. It's like she spent those years in the cellar building a library in her mind. The children maintained contact with each other through carefully supervised visits and phone calls. Their bond remained unbreakable, but therapists were working to help them develop relationships outside their traumatic shared experience. They were learning to be individuals as well as survivors. "We have pizza parties every Friday," Emma told Dr. Reeves during one of her sessions. "All 3 of us together. It feels normal now, but also special because we choose to be together instead of having to be together." Thomas had discovered a love for sports, particularly track and field. Running gave him a sense of freedom that he had never experienced, and his foster father often found him jogging around their property in the early morning hours, as if he were still amazed by his ability to move freely through space. "He runs like he's celebrating," Michael Chen observed. "Every step seems to remind him that he's free." Lucy had enrolled in regular school for the first time and quickly became one of the top students in her class. Her teachers were amazed by her focus and determination, though they also noted her tendency to bring extra food to school and share it with any child who seemed hungry. "She's very attuned to other people's needs," her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noted in her progress reports. "Sometimes I think she understands adult emotions better than most adults do." The photos scattered throughout their foster homes told the story of healing in ways that therapy notes and medical reports never could. Birthday parties with real cakes and invited friends, Christmas mornings with presents under a tree, school plays where Thomas designed sets and Emma helped younger children with their lines. But perhaps the most important photograph was one taken during a recent family picnic, showing all three children running together across an open field, their faces turned toward the sun, their shadows stretching behind them like memories they were. Finally learning to outrun, the stack of appeal documents on attorney Michael Chen's desk had grown to nearly 3 feet high over the 2 years since Sarah Hartwell's conviction. Each page represented another legal maneuver, another attempt to find grounds for overturning a death sentence that seemed as inevitable as sunrise. The mandatory appeals process moved forward like a machine designed to exhaust every possible avenue of legal recourse. Regardless of how futile those avenues might be, she still doesn't understand why we're doing this, Chen confided to his paralegal as they prepared the latest round of appeals paperwork. "Every time I visit her on death row, she asks me why I'm trying to help her when she hasn't done anything wrong. In her mind, we're appealing a wrongful conviction. The appeals focused on procedural issues rather than questions of guilt or innocence." Sarah's mental state, the adequacy of her legal representation, the admissibility of certain evidence, the composition of the jury, every aspect of the trial was scrutinized by appellate lawyers who understood that their job was to find legal errors, not to determine moral culpability. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been called to testify multiple times during the appeals process. Her expert opinion sought by both sides in the ongoing legal battle. The question of Sarah's competency to be executed had become a central issue, with mental health professionals divided on whether someone so completely divorced from reality could be held fully accountable for their actions. The paradox is fascinating from a legal standpoint. Dr. Reeves explained to a gathering of forensic psychiatrists studying the case. Sarah understands the factual reality of her situation. She knows she's in prison. She knows she's been convicted. She knows she faces execution. But she cannot grasp the moral reality of why society considers her actions wrong. The children's advocates had petitioned the court to limit the appeals process, arguing that the ongoing legal proceedings were prolonging the trauma for Emma, Thomas, and Lucy. Every new hearing, every news story about Sarah's appeals reminded the survivors that their ordeal was not truly over while their abuser remained alive. These children have shown remarkable resilience. Victim advocate Maria Santos testified before the appellate court. But they cannot fully heal while this case continues to dominate their lives. They deserve closure, and they deserve to move forward without the constant reminder that their abuser is still fighting to escape justice. Sarah's health had deteriorated significantly during her time on death row. The isolation and institutional routine had taken their toll on someone who was already psychologically fragile. Medical reports showed signs of depression and anxiety, though she continued to maintain her innocence and express confusion about her circumstances. "She talks about her children every day," reported Correctional Officer Janet Mills, who had been assigned to Sarah's block for over a year. "She worries about who's taking care of them, whether they're eating properly, whether they miss her. She has no understanding that they're better off without her." Legal scholars had begun using Sarah's case as an example of the complexities involved in executing mentally ill defendants. Law schools across the country included her appeals in their curricula, debating the ethical implications of capital punishment for someone who genuinely could not comprehend the evil of their actions. The case raises fundamental questions about the purpose of the death penalty, argued Professor Elizabeth Warren from the State Law School. If punishment is meant to deter future crimes, how effective can it be against someone who believes they were acting out of love? If it's meant to provide closure for victims, how do we balance that against concerns about executing the mentally ill? The appeals process had become a bureaucratic maze that seemed to serve no one's interests. Sarah remained convinced of her innocence. The children remained trapped in legal limbo, and the justice system continued processing paperwork that everyone knew would ultimately be rejected. It's become a ritual, observed appellate court judge Sarah Martinez. We go through the motions because the law requires it, but there's no question about the ultimate outcome. The evidence is overwhelming, the procedures were followed correctly, and the sentence was appropriate given the severity of the crimes. Media coverage of the appeals had diminished over time as public attention moved on to other tragedies and other trials. But the legal machinery continued its work, processing documents and scheduling hearings for a case that had already been decided in every meaningful sense. As Chen prepared what would likely be Sarah's final appeal to the state Supreme Court, he reflected on the strange position of defending someone who didn't want to be defended, at least not in any conventional sense. Sarah's legal fight wasn't about proving innocence or escaping punishment. It was about validating a worldview so distorted that reality itself had become the enemy. Emma. Chen adjusted her graduation cap one final time before walking across the stage to receive her high school diploma. The document representing far more than academic achievement, it symbolized a triumph over circumstances that should have destroyed any chance at a normal life. In the audience, her foster parents, Helen and Michael Rodriguez, beamed with pride, while Thomas and Lucy cheered from the front row with an enthusiasm that drew smiles from strangers who had no idea what these three young people had. Overcome, the diploma bore Emma's chosen name, Emma Rodriguez, marking her legal adoption by the family that had given her the childhood she had never experienced in her first 13 years. At 18, she had grown into a poised young woman whose maturity came not from trauma alone, but from the careful nurturing she had received during 5 years of healing and growth. "I want to study social work," Emma had announced to her family during her senior year, a decision that surprised no one who knew her story. There are other children out there who need someone to understand what they've been through. I want to be that person for them. Thomas, now 15, had become something of a local celebrity in the art world. His paintings were displayed in galleries throughout the state, and the proceeds from their sales funded a scholarship program for child abuse survivors. His work had evolved from the dark, constrained images of his early recovery to vibrant landscapes that captured both beauty and hope. "He paints the world as it should be," explained his art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, during a recent exhibition opening. "But he also paints it as it can be for children who have survived the unthinkable. His art gives hope to people who thought hope was impossible." Thomas had chosen to keep the name his birth mother had given him, though he had been legally adopted by foster father Michael Chen, a retired art teacher who understood the healing power of creative expression. Their home had become an informal studio where Thomas mentored other young artists, particularly those who had experienced trauma. Lucy, now 13 and thriving in middle school, had exceeded every expectation for her recovery. Her exceptional memory and gift for languages had led to placement in accelerated academic programs, while her natural empathy made her a favorite among both teachers and fellow students. "She has this remarkable ability to sense when someone is struggling," observed her guidance counselor. "She'll quietly befriend the shy kids, include the ones who seem left out, share her lunch with anyone who forgot theirs. It's like she has a built-in radar for people who need help." Lucy had been adopted by Maria Santos, the victim advocate who had guided her through the early days of her recovery. The bond had grown naturally from professional support to genuine maternal love, creating a family unit that honored Lucy's past while embracing her future. The three siblings maintained their close relationship through weekly family dinners that rotated between their homes. These gatherings had become sacred time, allowing them to stay connected while pursuing their individual paths toward healing and growth. "We're still a family," Emma explained to a documentary filmmaker who'd been following their recovery. "We just have more people in our family now. We learned that family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who chooses to love you and stick with you through everything." Their story had become a case study in resilience and recovery, though the siblings themselves were selective about when and how they shared their experiences. They had testified before legislative committees working on child protection laws, spoken at conferences for social workers and therapists, and participated in research studies that might help other survivors. "We want our story to help people," Thomas said during one such presentation. "Not because what happened to us was special, but because surviving it doesn't have to be impossible." There are kids out there right now who need to know that life can get better. Sarah Hartwell remained on death row, her appeals exhausted and her execution date approaching. The children had chosen not to attend her execution, focusing instead on their healing and their futures. They had forgiven her, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because carrying hatred would have given her power over their lives that she no longer deserved. Forgiveness isn't about her, Emma had explained to Dr. Reeves during one of their final therapy sessions. "It's about us. It's about refusing to let what she did define who we become." The high school diploma in Emma's hands represented more than personal achievement. It was proof that evil could steal childhood, but could not destroy the human capacity for growth, love, and hope. As she walked off the graduation stage toward a future filled with possibility, she carried with her the dreams of every child who had ever survived the unthinkable. The final meal request form sat on Warden Patricia Coleman's desk, filled out in Sarah Hartwell's neat handwriting that had remained unchanged despite 6 years on death row. Her request was simple: steamed vegetables from an organic garden, brown rice, and herbal tea. No meat, no processed foods, no artificial ingredients, even facing death. She maintained the nutritional obsessions that had defined her twisted approach to motherhood. "She wants to know if the vegetables are locally grown," reported Correctional Officer Janet Mills, who had been Sarah's primary contact during her final weeks. "She's concerned about pesticides and transportation time affecting their nutritional value. She still doesn't understand why any of this matters anymore." The execution was scheduled for midnight on a cold February evening, exactly 6 years and 4 months after the discovery of the children in her cellar. Sarah had spent her final weeks in the same state of serene confusion that had characterized her entire incarceration, expressing concern for her children's welfare and bewilderment about why she was being punished for loving them. Prison chaplain Father Rodriguez had spent countless hours trying to counsel Sarah, but she remained impervious to concepts of sin, guilt, or redemption. In her mind, she was a martyr being executed for the crime of protecting her children from a dangerous world. "She prays for her children every night," Father Rodriguez explained to the warden. "But she prays that they're being fed properly, that they're staying safe, that they remember how much their mama loved them. She has no awareness that they're better off without her." Outside the prison, protesters had gathered on both sides of the death penalty debate. Some carried signs demanding justice for the murdered children, while others argued that executing a mentally ill woman was itself a form of cruelty. The case had become a flashpoint for broader discussions about mental illness, maternal bonds, and the limits of criminal accountability. Emma Thomas and Lucy had issued a joint statement through their advocate, declining to attend the execution and requesting privacy during this final chapter of their ordeal. They had chosen to spend the evening together at Emma's apartment near her college campus, supporting each other as they had always done. "We don't need to watch her die to know that we've survived," Emma had written in their statement. "Our healing doesn't depend on her punishment. We're focusing on our futures, not on her end." Dr. Patricia Reeves observed the execution as part of her ongoing research into criminal psychology and the death penalty's impact on survivors. She sat in the witness gallery, taking notes that would become part of academic studies on closure and justice for victims of extreme crimes. Sarah was brought into the execution chamber at 11:47 p.m., appearing calm and almost peaceful as she was strapped to the gurney. Her last words, delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone she had used throughout her trial, sent chills through everyone present. "I hope my children understand that everything I did was because I loved them," she said, looking directly at the ceiling as if speaking to some higher authority. "I was protecting them from a world that would have hurt them. I was giving them purpose and meaning. I don't understand why people think love is wrong." The lethal injection began at exactly midnight. Sarah showed no fear, no remorse, no recognition that her death was the consequence of monstrous crimes. She simply closed her eyes as if going to sleep, her face maintaining the serene expression that had disturbed observers throughout her incarceration. "Time of death, 12:04 a.m., announced the prison physician, his voice echoing in the stark chamber. The witnesses filed out in silence, each processing the surreal experience of watching someone die who genuinely believed she had been a loving mother, wrongly persecuted by a society that couldn't understand true devotion. The execution brought legal closure to the case, but it provided no answers to the deeper questions about how maternal love could be so completely perverted. Media coverage of the execution was extensive but brief. Sarah Hartwell's death marked the end of a chapter that most people preferred to forget, a reminder that evil could hide behind the most sacred of human bonds. Her final meal request would be noted in prison records, a last symbol of the nutritional obsessions that had defined her approach to raising children she intended to murder. As dawn broke over the prison, Sarah's body was prepared for burial in the prison cemetery, her grave marked only by a number rather than a name. The vegetables she had requested for her final meal remained untouched in her cell, a final irony in a case defined by the perversion of nurturing instincts into something monstrous. The memorial garden stretched across the site where Sarah Hartwell's farmhouse had once stood, its carefully tended beds of flowers and vegetables creating beauty where horror had reigned for so many years. The community had voted unanimously to demolish the house and barn, but rather than leaving the land empty, they had transformed it into a place of healing and remembrance. A small plaque near the garden's entrance bore a simple inscription: "In memory of the children who suffered here, and in celebration of the resilience of those who survived, may this place now nurture hope where once there was only fear." Emma stood before the gathered crowd on the garden's dedication day, her college diploma tucked safely in her bag, along with her acceptance letter to graduate school. At 21, she had grown into a confident young woman whose calling to help other survivors had only strengthened over the years. "This garden represents something my siblings and I have learned through our healing," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled community members, many of whom had lived with guilt over their failure to act sooner. Beautiful things can grow in the darkest places. Hope can bloom where evil once flourished. But it takes intention, care, and the commitment of an entire community. The Sarah Hartwell case had indeed led to significant improvements in rural child welfare monitoring systems. Social workers now conducted unannounced visits to isolated families. Postal workers were trained to recognize signs of abandonment or neglect, and communities had established networks for checking on vulnerable residents, We can't change what happened, acknowledged County Social Services Director Rebecca Martinez. But we can ensure that no child suffers in isolation again. This case taught us that privacy and neglect are not the same thing, and that sometimes caring for our neighbors means asking uncomfortable questions. Thomas, now 18 and headed to art school on a full scholarship, had created a sculpture for the garden center. The bronze piece depicted 3 children holding hands, their faces turned toward the sun, surrounded by birds taking flight. It was both a memorial to what they had endured and a celebration of their freedom. Art helped me understand that surviving something terrible doesn't mean you have to carry it forever. Thomas explained to the crowd. You can transform it into something that helps other people. You can take the worst thing that happened to you and use it to create something beautiful. Lucy, now 16 and excelling as student body president of her high school, had organized a scholarship fund that would help other child abuse survivors pursue their education. Her natural leadership abilities and deep empathy had made her a voice for vulnerable children throughout the state. We want other kids to know that what happens to you doesn't determine what you become, Lucy said during her dedication speech. We were kept in cages, but we didn't become caged people. We were raised by someone who was sick, but we learned what healthy love looks like from the families who chose us. Dr. Patricia Reeves had published her comprehensive study on the children's remarkable recovery, contributing to the understanding of resilience and post-traumatic growth in extreme cases of childhood abuse. Her research had influenced treatment protocols and given hope to therapists working with other severely traumatized children. The Hartwell children proved that the human spirit is more resilient than we often believe, Dr. Reeves concluded in her landmark paper. But their recovery also demonstrates the crucial importance of immediate intervention, consistent support, and the healing power of genuine family relationships. The Memorial Garden had become a place of pilgrimage for social workers, child advocates, and survivors of abuse from across the country. Visitors left flowers, notes of encouragement, and small tokens of hope. The garden's peaceful atmosphere provided a stark contrast to the horror that had once occupied the same ground. Pastor Williams, now retired but still active in the community, offered a closing blessing at the dedication ceremony. His words reflected the community's ongoing process of healing and renewal. We gather not to dwell on the darkness that once claimed this place, but to celebrate the light that has overcome it, he said. 3 children who should have been destroyed by evil have instead become beacons of hope. This garden will remind us always that love is stronger than hatred, that community is stronger than isolation, and that healing is always possible when we care for one another. As the ceremony concluded and visitors began to explore the garden's winding paths, Emma, Thomas, and Lucy walked together through the space that had once been their prison. They had chosen to attend the dedication not as victims returning to the scene of their trauma, but as survivors reclaiming a place of pain and transforming it into a symbol of hope. The Memorial Garden would continue to grow and change with the seasons, its flowers blooming and fading in natural cycles that reminded visitors of the ongoing nature of healing and renewal. Where once there had been only darkness and despair, there was now beauty, purpose, and the enduring proof that even the most damaged soil could nurture new life.